Hello, and welcome to this month's discussion group. Today, we are going to be touching on a romantic topic, and that is because this week falls on Valentine's Day, and we thought it would be very timely content for some of you out there. There's varying statistics out there, but in general, Valentine's Day is one of the most popular days to get engaged. So this is very applicable to those engaged and then also families. And we want to touch on kind of best practices for how to enter a new marriage off on the right foot, what that might mean from a broader family's perspective, and best practices around that.
That's right. Now to keep up with the puns, as we're talking about marriage and we want no cold feet, as Megan said, start everything off on the right foot. If you're thinking about getting engaged or you're recently engaged, there really are three sort of different areas that we think are important that you can discuss with your significant other about from a financial perspective. The first is communication. The second is having transparency. And then third is the coordination. When we talk about communication, it's a multitude of things. It's really, how do you feel about money? Are you a spender or are you a saver? And what are your goals or aspirations from a financial perspective? Whether it's, do you want to put away money for eventual kids, or is it a down payment on a house, or is it really long-term, you want a vacation house? But what's really most important is really being able to work with your significant other about talking about finances, because it's, for some people, it's a very easy topic. It's easy to talk about, but for other people, it does take a little bit more to become more comfortable, because money is usually a very, I'd say, can be a very tense subject for a lot of people. So to be able to work on that communication is important. And when we talk about transparency, it's about really knowing what you're bringing into a marriage, what your spouses or your significant other is going to bring into the marriage, whether it's from an income perspective or a savings or inheritance. But it also includes things like credit card debt, debt such as credit card debt or maybe a student loan. And there are different types of ways that you can look at this too. When there's something that is also called financial infidelity, and that's really when you are either purposely or not purposely lying about your financial situation to your significant other. And in fact, there's a statistic that says 55% of people believe that having financial infidelity is more serious than cheating. So, the idea is that, looking at it from a kind of two perspectives. From a rich perspective, it's, if you're struggling to afford a down payment, but you find out your spouse has a inheritance that they received outright that could have gone towards that project or that goal. And from a other side, it could be that your fiance bought your ring on a credit card and didn't tell you that that's adding to their mountain of debt. So those are the types of things to, again, be open and honest about. And then from the coordination side, it's saying, all right, once we get married, how are we going to tackle whether it's saving for our goals or dealing with debts, but really, how are you going to merge your two financial lives together? So as we kind of move forward, JR, can you talk about some of the best practices that, for parents and kind of what they can do to help their kids along this process?
Well, I think in many cases, having a little fun with this. In general, parents are faced with getting a very happy call or FaceTime. Their daughter, their son had just got engaged that evening, and they're very happy. They're celebrating with them. And the next day, many parents wake up, and what do? They go into protection mode. What does that mean? What's going to happen? What if something goes bad? How do we protect ourselves? How do we protect the estate? How do we, right? And go into a lot of those conversations between them, whether they explicitly state them or they happen to be in their mind, and really thinking about, what do you do as a family once a grandchild or one of your children get engaged? How should you prepare and plan? And we think that the number one thing you need to do as parents is have your own affairs in order. Understand what your plan says, how it flows. If something does happen, is there something you need to worry about from how you've planned or set up your estate plan? And we think that's the number one starting place to assess, is there a problem even, or you're just worrying like all parents do, right? And then from there, really being able to communicate as a family between generations is critically important, because if you've already set aside some assets for your children, they should be generally aware of those. And it's helpful to now share some of that information. We don't think you need to sit down and share all of your financial information with your children or grandchildren. But if you've already allocated some trust money or something that they're going to be a beneficiary of in the near term, it's good information to start to share with your children or grandchildren now that they're engaged, and then let them kind of understand the information and then look to communicate with their future spouse as well.
Yeah, and I think also just kind of laddering off that with the communication outside of just there is or isn't something there. Also, if you have certain intentions behind what you, as you know, the family would like the other generations to do with the wealth, if you do have an opinion. If not, then you know that might not apply, but every family is different. But especially if there are intentions behind it, that is really important to communicate as well, so that your kids or their kids can start off on the right foot and make sure to kind of use it accordingly for what your wishes are.
Well, and part of it too, Megan, is just to go back to the financial infidelity, right? And as parents or grandparents, if you don't share or if something's coming, it's a nice thing for a family to have a windfall in the future, but it's also good for both your child and their future spouse to be aware of that and not have a surprise, because some of those windfalls can turn into negatives as well, depending on how your children might communicate or not communicate that in the future as well.
And I think as we we look at sort of a planning tool that is a little bit older, isn't as common anymore. But one thing that I think everybody's aware of are the prenup agreements. And if we look at those and say, all right, well, as we're saying, they're not as common anymore, but what are the sort of the good, the bad, and the ugly with prenups? But when we look at it from the good perspective, it forces more of the communication that, sort of what somebody's going into a marriage with. And, again, opening the lines of communication, if there aren't any in the long run, is likely to be a good thing. However, on the flip side, from the bad perspective, it's from the spouse, their soon-to-be spouse that needs to sign the agreement, do they not feel as accepted within the family? Are there other types of restrictions that sort of make them feel lesser, that just there isn't really that trust that you really want to have going into a marriage? And then overall, from a prenup side, that there really aren't as ironclad as some people might think. So it is something that isn't a perfect fix or perfect solution, I should say, for protecting inherited family wealth.
And when you look at who generally encourages strongly prenups, it's usually the parents, talking to their children. It's not usually a decision a child makes on their own as they're entering this. And it gets into those challenges of first, as parents, understanding your estate plan, and then really questioning, is there risk and need the prenup, or is it about educating how the estate plan is, how assets are titled, and there really isn't the exposure. And again, many times we find as families kind of educate themselves of their own estate plan, the prenup may be unnecessary, right? But a lot of times, just out of an abundance of caution, parents will strongly encourage their children to do this, and that's where you can get into that bad and ugly scenario.
Definitely. And I think, so although those are always an option, and while they might be a little bit dated or less popular these days, there are still plenty of modern solutions that help start the marriage off on the right foot, but help also provide equal protection potentially to family inherited assets that the family intends to, keep within a bloodline or other items. So there are modern tools such as irrevocable trusts that can do a lot of the same things as a prenup if managed correctly and appropriately. In addition, from the couple's perspective, just a good way to start off a marriage on the right foot, especially since finances does contribute to one of the leading reasons for divorce, is to just get a big picture of what everything's out there between the two of you and help build a plan together moving forward with how you want to manage that. And the best way to get started with that would be a net worth statement, and just kind of seeing everything out there. Even in some cases, if you're just genuinely aware of that there are family inherited assets, but maybe not necessarily the details, just so that there's not surprises down the road that might make you feel one way or the other. So those are kind of good solutions. In addition, outside of that, just being kind of cautious of commingling assets between premarital assets and postmarital. So long as you really kind of manage wealth that you want to keep separately from a marriage in case anything were to happen, and not commingle that into a joint account or something like that, will go a long way outside of just some of these other solutions.
And again, that net worth statement, you kind of get the good, the bad, and the ugly ahead of, you kind of your marriage. So the good can be you're fortunate to have saved up a lot. The bad can be you haven't saved enough and you're a little bit embarrassed. And the ugly is the debt, right? How much you've borrowed on credit cards or student loans or other debt out there. And it's just good to have that transparency and have all of that information available to both spouses.
Definitely. And to Michael's point earlier with the financial infidelity, that also just kind of goes from purposely omitting things. And that's where a net worth statement can really help. Just put it on the table, have the discussion now before you're in a legally bound situation, making sure both spouses are comfortable with kind of the circumstances regardless. So with that, we are hopefully going to leave you with a happily ever after. If you have any questions or further things to clarify, please feel free to reach out to our team. We're always here and we cover topics like this on a regular basis. Have a great rest of your day.
Thank you.
Thank you.